All right, wait, I was going to go to the phone, but I'm not. I said I wanted to read this article, okay? This is written by Barbara Einreich, and this is an amazing, illuminating article about, you know, the way that, the direction conservatives would love to take us. And obviously, we cannot go in this direction. We just can't. This would be a defiling of everything that you think is important to you as an American citizen, meaning privacy and freedom and liberty. And you know what's really interesting? The reason why I went looking for some information about, you know, whether or not the poor are to blame for, you know, the entire, you know, economic disaster. John Lovitz, who I like John Lovitz. I mean, I have nothing against him. He actually has a comedy club out in L.A., and he was sitting there and, you know, talking on the stage. And, you know, when your story begins with, I was on a stage in a comedy club, then you know he said something that he's being pilloried for. And, you know, that's exactly what happened to him. He was apparently on it. And it sounded so familiar to me because I know what this is, that I actually had sympathy for him. But he walked himself into a terrible place. He went on Piers Brosnan, Piers Morgan, whatever. My mother is the viewer. I figured out who watches that show. It's my mother. And he was going to explain why he said that he doesn't like Barack Obama anymore because he's so sick of Barack Obama saying tax the rich because John Lovitz thinks that he's rich. Now, of course, this isn't the entire crux of our problem. The problem we have is using the tax code when you're very wealthy, using the tax code to change the fabric of American society, to redistribute wealth from ordinary Americans on up the ladder so that a very small handful of people own an enormous amount of wealth and the rest of us don't.
So I'm on stage in a comedy club.
See, I'm on stage in a comedy club. That's as soon as I heard that, I went, okay, this story does not, this won't bode well for John Lovitz.
So I'm on stage in a comedy club, and I was talking about
Kevin Smith with you, right? Let's watch the Obama clip because I want to put it into the right context.
Right.
Let's see this.
This whole thing with Obama saying the rich don't pay their taxes is and I voted for the guy, and I'm a Democrat. What a The rich don't pay their taxes. Let me tell you something, right? First they say to you, you're dead broke. The United States of America, you can do anything you want. Go for it. So then you go for it, and then you make it, and everyone's like, you.
This got him into an enormous amount of trouble. So he went on Piers, and he tried to explain.
You don't think people that ran Wall Street are responsible for a lot of the economic meltdown this country had to suffer?
Maybe some of it, but not all of it. Some people, they got housing loans, you know, I think they're responsible for taking a loan that they didn't qualify for.
Well, who is more responsible? The very, very smart people who know exactly what they are offering, or the people who are perhaps not so smart, not so well versed in the property market, in loans, in finance generally, who get traduced into accepting these and then lose everything?
Well, that's wrong. Yeah, if you're being
more to blame?
Well, you're saying if you're being conned into a loan and you're lying, then that's wrong.
I'm not saying they conned them. I'm just saying
they left that information.
They knew a hell of a lot more about it, what they were doing, than I think a lot of the people on the receiving end. There are people who lost their homes in this huge crisis, should never have been allowed to have these gigantic loans.
Exactly.
Yeah, but whose fault is that? They shouldn't have been allowed to have them.
Well, I think it's the bank's fault for making them, and I think it's the people's fault for taking the loans.
Who's more responsible? You know, and the whole phrase. This is why I always tell my mother, don't watch that stupid show. The phrasing it in terms of who's smart gets to, you know, I mean, it's like buyer beware. There's smart people out there, and you're stupid. That's not what happened. You had people who qualified for prime loans stuck and shoved into subprime loans so that they had the interest rates just double in a few months to the point where they couldn't afford the houses they did qualify for. So I just got really pissed at this whole stupid conversation about how the smart and you're stupid and blah, blah, blah. And listen to this. This is a story about how we are a piggy bank for the bankers, how we are a piggy bank for the prison industry. Individually, the poor are not too tempting to thieves for obvious reasons. If you mug a banker, you might score a wallet containing a month's rent, but if you mug a janitor, you'll be lucky to get away with bus fare to flee the crime scene. But as Business Week helpfully pointed out in 2007, the poor in aggregate provide a juicy target for anyone depraved enough to make a business of stealing from them. The trick is to rob them in ways that are systemic, impersonal, and almost impossible to trace to individual perpetrators. Employers, for example, can simply program their computers to shave a few dollars off each paycheck. Or they require workers to show up 30 minutes or more before the time clock starts ticking. Lenders, including major credit companies as well as payday lenders, have taken over the traditional role of the street corner loan shark, charging the poor insanely high rates of interest when supplemented with late fees, themselves subject to interest. The resulting effective interest rate can be as high as 600% a year, which is perfectly legal in many states. And it's not just the private sector that's preying on the poor. Local governments are discovering that they can partially make up for declining tax revenues through fines and fees and other costs imposed on defendants, often for crimes no more dastardly than driving with a suspended license. And if that seems like an inefficient way to make money, given the high cost of locking people up, a growing number of jurisdictions have taken to charging defendants for their court costs and even the price of occupying a jail cell. The poster case for government persecution of the down and out would have to be Edwina Nolan, a homeless Michigan woman who was jailed in 2009 for failing to pay $104 a month to cover the room and board charges for her 16-year-old son's incarceration. When she received a back paycheck, she thought it would allow her to pay her son's jail stay. Instead, it was confiscated and applied to the cost of her own incarceration. See, her son was being charged for his own jail cell, and she was the responsible party because her son was only 16 years old. And she got a back paycheck, and she thought, all right, I'll pay for his room and board, but they went and arrested her for failing to pay for him. You might think that policymakers would take a keen interest in the amounts that are stolen, coerced, or extorted from the poor, but there are no official efforts to track such figures. Instead, we have to turn to independent investigators like Kim Bobo, author of Wage Theft in America, who estimates that wage theft, just shaving a couple of bucks off your paycheck, nets employers at least $100 billion a year, possibly twice that. As for the profits extracted by the lending industry, Gary Rivlin, who wrote Broke USA, From Pawn Shops to Poverty, Inc., How the Working Poor Became Big Business, says the poor pay an effective surcharge of about $30 billion a year for the financial products they consume, and more than twice that if you include subprime auto loans, subprime mortgages, and subprime credit cards. Meaning the richer you are, the less you pay in interest for all these things. And the poorer you are, the more you pay in interest for all these things. These are not, of course, trivial amounts. They are on the same order of magnitude as major public programs for the poor. The government distributes about $55 billion a year, for example, through the largest single cash transfer program for the poor, the Earned Income Tax Credit. At the same time, employers are siphoning off twice that amount, if not more, through wage theft. And while government generally turns a blind eye to the tens of billions of dollars in exorbitant interest that businesses charge the poor, it's notably chary with public benefits for the poor. Temporary assistance to needy families, for example, our sole remaining welfare program, gets only $26 billion a year in state and federal funds. The impression is left of a public sector that's gone totally schizoid. On the one hand, offering safety net programs for the poor. On the other, enabling large-scale private sector theft from the very people it's supposedly trying to help. At the local level, government is increasingly opting to join in the looting. In 2009, a year into the Great Recession, I first started hearing complaints from community organizers about ever more aggressive levels of law enforcement in low-income areas. Flick a cigarette butt, get arrested for littering. Empty your pockets for an officer conducting a stop-and-frisk operation, get cuffed for a few flakes of marijuana. Each of these offenses can result, at a minimum, in a 3-figure fine. And the number of possible criminal offenses leading to jail and/or fines has been multiplying recklessly. All across the country, from California and Texas to Pennsylvania, counties and municipalities have been toughening laws against truancy and ratcheting up enforcement, sometimes going so far as to handcuff children found on the streets during school hours. In New York City, it's now a crime to put your feet up on a subway seat, even if the rest of the car is empty. And a South Carolina woman spent 6 days in jail when she was unable to pay a $480 fine for the crime of having a messy yard. Some cities, most recently Houston and Philadelphia, have made it a crime to share food with indigent people in public places. Being poor itself is not yet a crime, but at least a third of the states being in debt can now land you in jail. If a creditor, like a landlord or a credit card company, has a court summons issued for you and you fail to show up on your appointed court date, a warrant will be issued for your arrest. And it's easy enough to miss a court summons, which may have been delivered to the wrong address, or in the case of some bottom-feeding bill collectors, simply tossed in the garbage, a practice so common that the industry even has a term for it, sewer service. In a sequence that National Public Radio reports is increasingly common, a person is stopped for some minor traffic offense, having a noisy muffler, say, or a broken brake light, at which point the officer discovers the warrant and the unwitting offender is whisked off to jail. Each of these crimes, neo-crimes and pseudo-crimes, carries financial penalties as well as the threat of jail time. But the amount of money thus extracted from the poor is fiendishly hard to pin down. No central agency tracks law enforcement at the local level, and local records can be almost willfully sketchy. According to one of the few recent nationwide estimates from the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, 10.5 million misdemeanors were committed in 2006. No one would risk estimating the average financial penalty for a misdemeanor, although the experts I interviewed all affirmed that the amount is typically in the hundreds of dollars, and if we take an extremely low ball, $200 per misdemeanor, bear in mind that 80 to 90% of criminal offenses are committed by people who are officially indigent, then local governments using law enforcement to extract or attempt to extract, they get $2 billion a year from the poor. And that's a small fraction. They go on to talk about, how they confiscate the driver's licenses of people who owe child support, guaranteeing you can't work because you can't drive. Michigan just started suspending driver's licenses of people who owe money for parking tickets. Las Cruces, New Mexico passed a law that punishes people who owe overdue traffic fines by cutting off their water, their gas, their sewage. Seriously. They've learned to make money off of people who were subprimed out of existence in the first place. 49 after.
Randy Rhodes.
Truth to power never sounded so good. This is The Randy Rhodes Show.